This is Hannibal here from thehannibaltv.com. Matt Hardy appeared for TNA last night in a surprise. The lights went out and they came back on, and Matt Hardy was there. He has stated that although he appeared as the delete version of Matt Hardy in TNA last night, it's a per appearance deal. I guess he has not signed a contract with him. So he's still technically a free agent. He's always been able to do independence with AEW, but I don't think AEW has had a deal with TNA lately. But one interesting thing, we have heard the rumors about Matt Hardy and the Wyatt family. TNA does appear to have kind of a working relationship with WWE now. We saw Jordan Grace appear at the Royal Rumble. She's the women's champion there. So obviously there's some type of working relationship that they did a long time ago, back when Don Callis was still the president of TNA, one of the co-presidents, do a thing with AEW and TNA, but that was years ago now, and they don't appear to have any real connection anymore. So that might be a hint that maybe Hardy will end up in the Wyatt group after all. They also announced at this pay-per-view, I think it was called Rebellion, that their next pay-per-view, Slammiversary, July 20th, will be at a great wrestling arena and a great MMA arena, great kickboxing arena, the historic Verdun Auditorium in Montreal. I have wrestled there for Jacques Rougeau in front of a sold-out crowd, and I would venture to guess that PCO, who has wrestled there numerous times and has been with TNA for a while now and wanted to bring Ring of Honor to the Verdun Auditorium, and they should have gone to the Verdun Auditorium. I bet you that PCO has something to do with this. And I can guarantee you right now, this will be the biggest crowd TNA has had in a long time. The place holds 4,000 or 5,000 people. And PCO is a good promoter. I'd even be willing to do interviews to help promote that, because I think that PCO deserves like a big night about him where he can be appreciated properly. Because although he has had success in Ring of Honor and TNA in his 50s now, which is amazing, he hasn't got to wrestle for either of those companies in the city where he's very popular. So I think that that's a great thing that he's going to get the opportunity. And as I said, that I used to watch wrestling in that arena. WWE came to that arena. Hulk Hogan's wrestled in that arena. It's like one of the all-time. It's like a classic wrestling arena. It's just an old school wrestling arena. It's a great arena. I had my first match for Jacques Rougeau there. So I think that's cool. I think it's a good thing they have new management in TNA now, and they got rid of Scott D'Amore, because what I saw from the highlights of the pay-per-view yesterday, it looked good. Sami Callihan also appeared for TNA last night. I like him. Met him numerous times. He's got an interview on this channel and a couple matches. But apparently he may not be under contract either, because he's still going to be wrestling for other companies. As far as AEW injuries, the Blade, who the Bunny was released, I think late last year. She used to manage the Blade. I guess he's been out of action with a back injury. He hasn't wrestled for AEW since January 10th. He did wrestle for an indie show in February, but yeah, for anyone wondering what's happened to him, he's just one of the I just figured he was one of the lost AEW wrestlers. Yuka Sakazaki suffered a legitimate leg injury on AEW Rampage, for anyone following her career. Let's talk about the AEW Dynasty pay-per-view tonight, which is from St. Louis in a 10,000 seat building. It's going to be set up for 7,000, and there's 6,447 tickets out so far. Let's go through the matches. I'll give you my predictions. I had an interview cancel on me tonight, but I'm actually looking forward to this interview. Gerald McClellan was a boxer that had a ridiculous amount of knockouts. It was supposed to be with his sister. It's gonna be rescheduled. Um, and he suffered a horrible injury in the ring, due mainly, in my opinion, to a referee. They put a referee in this match, this boxing match. Sorry to digress for a minute. That only spoke. The boxing match was in England. The referee only spoke French. The two boxers in the ring were English. Gerald was like saying there was something wrong with him. The referee couldn't understand, kept the fight going, and he ended up getting a brain injury that left him blind and under permanent care. And this was under Don King Promotions. Anyways, we're going to talk to his sister all about that situation whenever she is feeling better, as I'm quite interested in boxing. I actually like boxing. As far as doing it, I got into it a bit too old. But let me get back to this AEW Dynasty predictions. Adam Copeland and Eddie Kingston, another guy that Eddie Kingston has some matches on this channel, and Mark Briscoe versus the House of Black, who I do believe, what's his name? I know somebody on the House of Black. I just can't remember their wrestling name. Brody King, I think. I don't know if they have a different name in AEW. I like both of these teams, but I'll have to say I'll take Adam Copeland's team. Julia Hart versus Willow Nightingale for the TBS title. Julia Hart was one of the most over wrestlers at the AEW Collision I attended here in Ottawa about a month ago. She has a better look than Willow Nightingale. I will go with Julia Hart on that. Although, I mean, I know Willow Nightingale I don't know. Yeah, Julia Hart. I'm going to stick with that. Roderick Strong versus Kyle O'Reilly. I would not want to watch this match. I'll just say Kyle O'Reilly because they seem to be pushing him on the AEW Ottawa show, but I'm not interested in that match. Okada versus Pac for the Continental title. 100% Okada will win that one. Young Bucks versus FTR for the vacant tag team titles in a ladder match. There seems to be so many ladder matches lately, and I'm not saying this is an AEW thing, also WWE. The ladder matches things have been done to death, and I'm not hating. I like the Young Bucks. I can't. FTR to me, there's nothing wrong with them, but they're like mini brain busters. They're just so small, but nothing wrong with them. But I do actually don't mind the Young Bucks. But they were using ladders on the last pay-per-view, weren't they? In the match with Darby Allin and Sting. Tony Storm versus Thunder Rosa. Thunder Rosa, I think, has backstage heat, from what I understand. It's unlikely she'll win, but you never know. I'm not I'm not. I saw that Tony Storm appeared at a indie show, WrestleMania weekend. I'm not a fan of the gimmick. Will Ospreay versus Bryan Danielson. They seem to be really pushing Will Ospreay, so I would say Will Ospreay. Samoa Joe, my old tag team partner, versus Swerve Strickland. I know they like Swerve Strickland a lot, but I would say Samoa Joe. Funny that Jon Moxley isn't on this card. I think Jon Moxley is let me just look this up right now. I think John Moxley is wrestling with the GP title on the line on Dynamite, but it's strange that he's not on the pay-per-view. Very strange. He's one of my favorites in AEW. I actually really want to wrestle him. Oh, okay, no, it's Moxley against Powerhouse Hobbs on Dynamite. For some reason, Moxley isn't on the pay-per-view. I don't get, like, Moxley's been in CMLL, New Japan, but he's not on the actual AEW pay-per-view, even though he's one of the biggest stars. I don't know. It seems a little strange. And speaking of Samoa Joe, when I mentioned he was my former tag team partner, we beat Jinder Mahal and his former tag team partner Gamma Singh Jr. In Calgary back in 2008. We beat the crap out of them. And I guess most of the wrestlers that were fired, there was 5 wrestlers fired from WWE on Friday. Jinder Mahal, Shanga, V Mahan, and Sangha apparently said on social media that WWE wants viewership in India, but they no longer have any athletes from India. It's interesting that they got rid of a bunch of Indian athletes. Maybe something happened in India where maybe something happened that pissed them off about whatever deal they have in India, where they feel that they don't need any Indian athletes anymore. One interesting thing I remember, the tryout that Raj, which is Jinder Mahal's real name, was signed from. I remember his partner Gamma Singh Jr. The reason why they didn't sign him at that point, supposedly, from what I forget if it was Raj or Gamma Singh that told me this, but they said they only wanted one Indian guy at that time. That's why they didn't take them as a tag team. It's very demographic, just like AEW and Impact. And I'm not saying they're going to the demographics. They want the transgender demographics. WWE might not want to get that controversial, but it's like uh, Impact has Giselle Shaw, Nyla Rose has or AEW has Nyla Rose. I did hear Stephanie McMahon talk once too about for their championships in WWE, they had to be something like 33% ethnic champions. So it's very core. I love Indian people. There's a lot of Indian people that watch Hannibal TV, and Raj and I used to be very close friends. Um, the only the only thing I don't like about wrestling these days is how corporate it is. It's not always about who the best wrestlers are. Ethnicity has to do with it. I do think WWE, and I already mentioned this, but I'll say it again. As soon as Triple H beat Jinder Mahal in India, which I don't understand the point of that, they killed Jinder Mahal. Hello, Alfred. Mike, I'm sure I'll eventually get a Harris Brothers interview. Yes, Alfred. PCO is more of a Quebec legend than Steen or what's his face? I can't even remember his name. Sami Zayn. Because like he was tag team partners with the Rougeau, and the Rougeaus are absolutely iconic in Quebec, and like PCO is also more like French. Like, even though I think Kevin Steen might be French, he doesn't have like the French accent, and I don't even know. I'm Sami Zayn could very possibly be French too, but it seems like the Jacques Rougeau always like represented the French people, and PCO is like that too. So it's like that'll be a big night for him. And I said if there's anything I can do to help with that, I'm all for it. Garrett, why are wrestlers so small nowadays? Exactly. That's one of the issues I have with wrestling. They're just like small people doing flips. They're not as good characters overall. There's still some good characters. There are still some larger than life wrestlers, but less than ever. Like for instance, like I think on Raw, from what I hear, Sami Zayn and Chad Gable did an angle. Like these are two very small wrestlers. Like as a guy that's 275 pounds, I just have no interest in seeing that. And like for Ring of Honor, which I've said, and this is nothing against Ring of Honor, there's just way too many small wrestlers doing spot fests. That just so turns me off of that product. There, you obviously need some high flyers, but there's just an overabundance of high flyers. Less. I mean, I remember when like the Attitude Era and then the '80s Golden Era in WWE. Almost all the wrestlers were over. Almost all the wrestlers from top to bottom of the cards were over. I mean, you can't say that now. Not in either company. There's a lot of wrestlers in WWE, like all the other than Jinder Mahal. I've never heard of any of these other guys that were fired. And I read the news every day. And AEW, there's so many people that aren't even on TV. That, like, there's so many people that honestly, you guys tell me what percentage of wrestlers are actually over legitimately in AEW and WWE are legitimate stars. I would say maybe 10% in AEW and maybe 15 to 20 in WWE, maybe a little bit more for WWE. They definitely have more stars in WWE. Maybe 20% in WWE. That's just my thoughts. There's not as many from top to bottom of the cards. There's not as many stars. Boxing is the best exercise. I mean, I've had some amazing boxing workouts. I've also had at least one really bad concussion from boxing sparring. I remember sitting down after, sitting on a bench, and like the whole boxing room was spinning around me. But then I won the fight a couple weeks later because I was doing hard sparring. But I was caught with like a Superman punch that you really shouldn't be doing to people in sparring. I wasn't expecting it. Didn't knock me out, but I was I was screwed up for a couple days after that one. But as far as like the cardio from it, it's great. Anthony, I've had amazing workouts the past 2 weeks, and my strength is coming back after dealing with a couple bad years. But I'm going to be very ready for June 29th in Napanee, Ontario. And there's going to be another Great North Wrestling event in August. I won't let the cat out of the bag yet because Jack Kilby is still working on it. But I'm going to be definitely I'm training very hard right now, and I'm feeling better than I have in 2 years right now. So someone says even the mid cards back then are like the superstars now. Like yeah, exactly. Jimmy Snuka was like a mid card to lower mid card guy in the late '80s. In the Attitude Era, like frig, Billy Gunn was a mid card guy. He was so over. Someone says the skinny wrestlers make me watch '80s wrestling to remember the good old days. It's just they were so much better characters in those old days because I think they were also cooler personalities outside the ring. I'm not I'm not saying it was smart to do all the crazy stuff that they all did outside the ring, but it translated into better characters. You know most of these guys, and yeah, okay, it's smarter. The crazy guys just are still around. They just don't have jobs in wrestling anymore. But like most of the wrestlers today, they go back to their hotel rooms and play video games all night. I get it. It's healthier, but that lack of personality translates to the characters on the screen. Do I think Dino Bravo will go in the WWE Hall of Fame? He might be too controversial for them at this point. Someone says 6'1", 215 pounds, considers himself small for pro wrestling. Maybe in the 80s you would have been, but now you definitely be one of the bigger guys. Billy Jack Haynes update. His lawyer is going to do an interview with me on here soon. I don't. From what I understand, he's given 2 full confessions, and they're having his mental health evaluated. Um, so I don't know. He he definitely has mental health issues. Thank you, AQ. Yeah, he has mental health issues that certainly played a role in whatever happened with his wife of only about 2 years that had dementia, that was like 15 or 16 years older than him. He made a stupid decision. I'm not we can ask when the lawyer comes on here, but who knows if he'll ever see the light of day again, to be honest with you, in my opinion, because Billy Jack's no spring chicken. And they don't give bail to people accused of murder in Oregon unless it's very special circumstances. John, my interview with Bob Cook is one of the realest wrestling interviews he's seen in a very long time. I like Bob Cook overall. I have no problem with him. I think he's a nice guy. What do I think? Who do I think the best female wrestler is now? Oh God. I would have to say Rhea Ripley. Someone says Snuka was just an attraction by 1985. Now there's a crazy example of a character that was a character outside the ring and inside the ring. But I remember Jimmy Snuka in 1996. There was an independent show at the Super X, which is a fair here at the Ottawa Civic Center, which I've talked about, a very historic wrestling building in Ottawa, where AEW should have come when they did Collision here. It would have been a much better atmosphere, and it's right downtown. But Jimmy and I have wrestled there, by the way, in front of 4,000 fans for the very first Great North Wrestling event. But anyways, there was a fair and there was an afternoon and evening show, and I just remember Jimmy Snuka walking around the fairgrounds. And by the way, this was an wrestling event that was free with admission, and there was probably 2.5 to 3,000 people at each show. It was Jimmy Snuka against the Metal Maniac that night. Metal Maniac, who I ended up interviewing. But Jimmy Snuka was like wearing his Fiji Islands, I'll call it a skirt, because I don't know what the proper word is for it, with his crazy hair and like a tight shirt, and he still looked massive. And I remember, like, because I was going on the rides and stuff in between the 2 shows, and everybody, whether they knew wrestling or not, was like staring at Jimmy Snuka as he was walking around the fairgrounds in his outfit. And he did have a very attractive woman with him too. I don't know who the woman was. David agrees that the characters and looks were better back then. Mike, I have done a Mark Merrow interview on this channel that was very detailed, and then Rick Bassman also did a Mark Merrow interview on this channel. There's 2. And I couldn't afford another Mark Merrow interview at this point. But maybe down. I like Mark Merrow. We're on good terms. But what he talked about in very good detail, Sable leaving him for Brock Lesnar in that interview. And also X-Pac shitting in Sable's bag. His past as a drug dealer. It's a pretty good interview. Speaking of Sable, I was watching the Vince Russo interview podcast on Vince McMahon, which, by the way, that's a very interesting podcast. I know Mike D hates Vince Russo, but he did a good podcast with John Paz about Vince McMahon. Thank you, Morton Goldberg Talent, for becoming a YouTube member and helping support the channel. But Russo talked in this podcast that, remember when Vince McMahon wrote the angle where he's like making out with Sable and grabbing her ass? And this was just after the lawsuit. It's clearly he's the owner of the company writing an angle where he wants to make out with this girl. It's so bizarre. And then he's the owner of the company writing angles where his employees, like Steven Regal, have to kiss ass. Which, by the way, there's a funny story Dan Severn told in his recent interview with Violent J of the Insane Clown Posse, which is on their Unleashed TV channel. But I was able to put a clip on this channel of Steve Regal intoxicated wrestling Dan Severn. Because Steve Regal is a suck-up and an ass kisser, where a lot of people would be like, the stuff that Regal's got away with, he's only been able to get away with and still have a job because he is such an ass kisser. And yeah, Mike D hates William Regal. I just don't respect him. I don't respect him. I've heard from way too many people he's an office stooge. And I believe it.
Thank you for watching The Hannibal TV. Please help me out and like this video, then click the subscribe and get notifications buttons so